The engineer's thumb story from Sherlock Holmes.
Throughout my friendship with Sherlock Holmes, there were only two cases which I personally brought to his attention: the affair of Mr. Hatherley's thumb and that of Colonel Warburton's madness. Of these, the latter might have offered a more attractive field to the careful observer. Yet the former, by reason of its opening and its dramatic details, was far more worthy of being placed on record. Although this case allowed little scope for my friend's methods of deduction and tracing, it was nevertheless the more striking. I believe the affair was reported several times in the newspapers at the time, but how impressive can a mere half-column of print really be? Can a simple newspaper notice ever replace the slow unfolding of facts before one's eyes, the gradual lifting of the veil of mystery with each new discovery, and finally the full revelation of the truth in all its nakedness? At the time, the incident affected me deeply, and even after 2 years had passed, I could say that its impact was still fresh. The events I shall now summarize took place in the summer of 1889, shortly after my marriage. I had returned once more to civil life and resumed my medical practice, and had at last moved away from our rooms in Baker Street, thereby parting company with Sherlock Holmes. Nevertheless, I continued to visit my friend frequently, and at times even persuaded him to abandon his reclusive habits and come see us. My list of patients was steadily increasing, and since my house was not far from Paddington Station, I also had several clients among railway employees. One such railway worker, whom I had treated for a long-standing ailment, never tired of praising me and of sending every patient over whom he had influence to my practice. One morning, just as the clock was striking 7, I was awakened by a knock at my door from a maid, who told me that 2 men from Paddington had arrived and were waiting for me in my consulting room. I dressed in haste and went downstairs, for experience had taught me that railway cases were rarely trivial matters. As I descended the stairs, my friend the railway watchman emerged from the room, closing the door firmly behind him upon the man inside. "I brought him here," he whispered, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "He's all right." From the man's manner, one might have supposed that some strange creature was being held prisoner in my consulting room. "Then what's the matter?" I asked. "A new patient," he replied in the same low voice. "I wanted to bring him myself, so he wouldn't run off anywhere. He's calm and safe inside. Now I must go. I have a duty, just as you do." The conscientious fellow departed before I even had time to thank him. When I entered my consulting room, the man was seated beside the table. He was wearing a grayish suit of Scotch cloth, and his cloth cap lay upon my books. One of his hands was wrapped in a handkerchief, which was stained here and there with blood. He was young, certainly not more than 25. His strong, masculine face was exceedingly pale, and he looked as though he were in such pain that he scarcely knew what he was doing. "I'm sorry to disturb you at such an early hour, doctor," he said, "but I met with a very serious accident last night. I came here this morning, and when I asked at the station where I could find a doctor, the gentleman who was with me just now brought me here. I gave my card to your maid, but I see she has left it on the table." I took up the card and examined it. "Victor Hatherley, hydraulic engineer, 16A, Victoria Street, 3rd floor." That was what was printed upon it. As I seated myself, I said, "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. You've evidently been traveling by night, and night journeys are always trying." "I can hardly say that last night was a trying one," he replied, and then burst into laughter, loud, hysterical laughter that echoed through the house. He leaned back in his chair and laughed uncontrollably. The sound of it irritated me. "Stop that," I cried. "Control yourself." I poured out some water from the jug, but it was of no use. The man had fallen into that hysterical state which often follows a great shock in strong natures. Presently, he recovered himself somewhat, though his face was still pale and exhausted. "I've made a fool of myself," he said with difficulty. "Not at all. Here, drink this." I added a little brandy to the water. Some color returned to his bloodless cheeks. "I'm better now," he said. "Now, doctor, would you kindly look at my thumb, or rather at the place where my thumb ought to be?" He unwrapped the handkerchief and raised his hand. Though my nerves are fairly strong, even I was shaken. The man had 4 fingers on his hand, and where the thumb should have been, there was a horrible red wound. The finger had been cut or torn off at the very base. "My God!" I exclaimed. "What a dreadful injury! You must have lost a great deal of blood." "Yes. When I was hurt, I fainted, and I believe I lay unconscious for a long time. When I came to myself, it was still bleeding, so I bound my wrist tightly with my handkerchief and stiffened it with a stick." "Excellent. You ought to have been a surgeon. It was a matter of hydraulic pressure. That happens to be my special subject." Examining the wound, I said, "It has been severed by something exceedingly sharp and heavy." "Yes, something like a cleaver," he replied. "I suppose it was an accident?" "Certainly not." "Then an attempted murder?" "Most certainly." "You alarm me." After cleansing the wound, I dressed it, packed it with cotton, and bandaged it carefully. The man sat without a murmur and without a twitch of the face, only now and then biting his lip. "What do you feel now?" I asked when I had finished. "Capital. The brandy and the dressing have done wonders. My strength is coming back, but I am terribly weak, and it will take me some time to recover. I suppose you do not wish to talk just now about what has happened. You must have been greatly shaken." "Not at the moment, perhaps, but sooner or later I shall have to tell the police. Between ourselves, if it were not for my severed thumb, no one would ever believe what I have gone through. Such extraordinary things have happened to me that I must have some proof in my hand to make them credible. And even if they did believe me, the clues I have are so vague that I see little chance of justice being done." I cried. "If there's a problem to be solved, I would advise you, before going to the police, to consult my friend Sherlock Holmes." "I have heard the name," said the man. "I shall certainly go to the police, but if you will tell me where I can find Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I should be greatly obliged. Better still, I will take you to him myself. I should be most grateful. I'll have a carriage called at once. We might even have breakfast together. What do you say? Shall we go immediately?" "Yes. I shall not be at ease until I have told my story. Then my maid shall call a carriage at once. I will be with you directly." I hurried upstairs, gave my wife a brief account of the matter, and 5 minutes later, I was on my way with my new acquaintance to Sherlock Holmes's lodgings in Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes, as I had expected, was seated in the sitting room in his dressing gown, reading the agony column of the Times, while smoking his before-breakfast pipe, which he had carefully dried the previous day and left in the corner of the fireplace. He greeted us with his usual calm cordiality and ordered fresh bacon and eggs. After a substantial breakfast, we placed our visitor on the sofa, put a cushion under his head, and set before him a glass of brandy and water. "It is not difficult to see, Mr. Hatherley, that what you have experienced is no ordinary affair," began Holmes. "Pray, lie down and make yourself comfortable, as though you were in your own home. Tell us everything you can. If you grow tired, you may rest and continue when you have recovered." "Thank you," said my patient. "Since the doctor dressed my wound, I have felt myself again. Your breakfast has completed the cure. I shall not take up more of your valuable time than necessary. I will begin at once to relate my strange adventure." Holmes sank back into his large armchair, wearing that listless expression which concealed his keen intellect and extraordinary powers of observation. I seated myself opposite him, and we listened to our visitor's remarkable story. "I should tell you that I am a single man, an orphan, living alone in London," he began. "I am a hydraulic engineer, and during the years I worked at the well-known firm of Venner and Matheson in Greenwich, I gained considerable experience in my profession. 2 years ago, my father died and left me a comfortable inheritance, so I thought the time had come to set up on my own, and I rented an office in Victoria Street. I know that starting a new business is difficult for anyone, but mine was exceptionally so. For 2 years, I did nothing but wait in vain. I gave advice to only 3 people and obtained just one small job. My total gross earnings amounted to £27. Every day, from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, I sat patiently in my office. At last, I began to lose hope and to think that I should never get any work at all. Yesterday, however, just as I was about to leave the office, my clerk came in to say that a gentleman wished to see me on business. She brought in his card, on which was printed the name Colonel Lysander Stark. The man soon followed her in. He was rather above the average height, but extremely thin. I have never seen such a thin man. His nose and chin were exceedingly sharp. There seemed to be no flesh at all upon his cheeks. The skin of his face appeared stretched tight between his jaw and his cheekbones, as though drawn by a cord. Yet his glittering eyes, his brisk movements, and his confident bearing showed that this appearance was natural and healthy. His dress was plain and neat, and I judged his age to be between 35 and 40. With an accent that sounded German, he asked, "Are you Mr. Hatherley? I have been told that you're not only good at your profession, but also discreet and capable of keeping a secret." I was naturally pleased by such a compliment, as any young man would be, and I bowed to him, saying, "I should be interested to know who has spoken so well of me." "Perhaps it would be better not to say at present," he replied, "but I may tell you this much. The same source informed me that you are an orphan and unmarried, and that you live alone in London." "That is true," I said, "but if you do not mind, I should like to know what bearing that has upon the matter." "I thought you had come merely to discuss business." "Most certainly. You will soon understand that all I have said relates directly to business. I have a proposal to make to you, but I must insist upon absolute secrecy. Absolute secrecy, which, as you will appreciate, is easier for a man who lives alone than for one who lives in the bosom of a family. If I give you my word to keep your secret, you may rely upon it never being disclosed." He listened to me with a hard, searching gaze. I have never seen such suspicious and probing eyes. "Do you give me your word?" he asked at last. "Yes, I give you my word. Before the work, during the work, and after the work, you will not say a single word to anyone. You will not mention the matter, either in writing or in speech. As I said, I give you my word." "Very good." He suddenly sprang to his feet, darted to the door, and opened it. The passage was empty. "That will do," he said, returning to his seat. "I know that secretaries can be inquisitive. Now we can speak freely." He drew his chair close to mine and fixed me once more with that same questioning look. The strange manner of the emaciated man aroused in me a feeling of something like fear mixed with aversion. Even my dread of losing a client could not prevent my impatience from showing. "Pray speak of the business, sir," I said. "My time is valuable." I wish now that those words had never escaped my lips. "Would £1,000 for one night's work be satisfactory to you?" he asked. "Certainly." Do not let the phrase "one night" mislead you. In fact, the work will not take more than an hour. I merely wish to consult you about a defective hydraulic press. If you can point out the fault, we can repair it ourselves. What do you think of that? It seems a very large sum for so simple a task. It is. We wish you to come by the last train tonight. Where to? To Ayford, on the Berkshire border, adjoining Oxfordshire. It is about 11 kilometers from Reading. If you take the last train from Paddington, you will arrive there about 11:15. Very well. I shall meet you there with a carriage. Then the place we are going is some distance from the station? Yes, we are in the country. Ayford station is 11 kilometers away. In that case, it will be past midnight by the time we arrive. I shall not be able to catch a return train. I may have to spend the night with you. Of course, do not be concerned. We can accommodate you. I would rather not trouble you. Can I not come earlier? We considered that, but decided it would be better for you to come late. We are aware that we are inconveniencing you, and that is why we are offering to a young and unknown engineer such as yourself a fee that would ordinarily be paid only to the best in the profession. If, however, you do not wish to accept the work, you are free to withdraw. But the mention of £1,000 had completely turned my head. I kept thinking of all that I could do with such a sum. No, I said, I will not withdraw. I shall be happy to do whatever you wish, but I should like to know exactly what you require of me. Certainly, we took a pledge of secrecy from you, and that has naturally aroused your curiosity. I do not wish you to accept the work without knowing what you will encounter. Are you sure that no one can overhear us? Quite sure. Then I shall explain. You know how valuable Fuller's Earth is. You must also know that in England it is found in only 1 or 2 places. I have heard so. Some time ago, I purchased a small estate about 16 kilometers from Reading. I was delighted to find Fuller's Earth in one of my fields, but more careful examination showed me that the deposit on my land was small and that the really large deposits lay in the 2 adjoining fields. My neighbors were unaware that a substance as valuable as gold lay beneath their soil. Naturally, I wished to buy their land before they discovered its true worth. Unfortunately, I did not have the money to do so. When I confided my secret to a few friends, they advised me to work my small deposit secretly and use the profits to buy my neighbors' fields. That is what I have been doing for some time. To facilitate our work, we set up a large hydraulic press. As I have already told you, the press has broken down, and we wish to consult you as to how it may be repaired. But we are keeping this secret from everyone, for if it were known that a hydraulic engineer had visited our humble house, people would begin to inquire and investigate. The truth would come out, and our plan to buy our neighbor's land would be ruined. That is why I took your word that you would tell no one that you were going to Ayford tonight. I believe I have explained the matter sufficiently. I understand what you have said very well, I replied. But there is one point that puzzles me. What use is a hydraulic press in extracting Fuller's Earth? After all, you are merely digging soil, are you not? Ah, he said carelessly. We have devised certain methods. We press the soil into brick-like shapes so that no one can tell what we are really doing. That is only a small detail. By telling you my secret, I have shown you how much I trust you. Before I could say another word, he rose and added, I shall expect you at Ayford at 11:15. I shall certainly be there. He gave me one last long, searching look, and as he shook my hand with his cold grasp, he said, not a single word to anyone, and hurried out of the room. When he had gone, I thought the matter over more calmly, and the suddenness with which this work had come to me filled me with amazement. On the one hand, the fee was at least 10 times what such a job was worth, which pleased me greatly. On the other, the man's face and manner had left an unfavorable impression upon me. His explanation about Fuller's Earth did not satisfactorily account for the necessity of my coming at night and keeping the matter secret. Still, I put aside all my misgivings, ate a substantial dinner, and set off for Paddington. In accordance with his instructions, I did not tell a soul where I was going. When I reached Reading, I had to change both my cab and my train, but I still managed to catch the last train to Ayford, and a little after 11 I alighted at a poorly lit station. I was the only passenger to get out. There was no one to be seen except a sleepy porter with a lantern. Passing through the small gate and leaving the station, I saw the man I had met earlier waiting in the shadows on the opposite side. Without a word, he seized my wrist and bundled me into a closed carriage whose door stood open. He lowered the side windows, knocked on the roof to signal the driver, and we set off at a gallop. Was the carriage drawn by one horse? Holmes interjected. Yes, it was. Did you notice the color of the horse? Yes. I saw it in the light of the side lamp as I got in. It was chestnut. Did a horse look tired or fresh? It was fresh and spirited. Thank you. Forgive the interruption. Please continue your interesting story. We drove for at least an hour. Colonel Lysander Stark had said that we would travel only 11 kilometers, but judging by our speed and pace, I believe we covered 18 or 19 kilometers. Though we sat side by side throughout the journey, he did not speak. Whenever I glanced at him, I could see that he was watching me with an expression of extreme tension. The roads were rough, and the carriage jolted violently. I tried to look out of the window to get some sense of where we were going, but through the frosted glass I could see nothing but a blur of light. From time to time, I tried to break the oppressive atmosphere by making some remark, but the colonel dismissed me with monosyllabic replies. At last, the jolting ceased. We turned onto a gravel road, and the carriage came to a halt. Colonel Lysander Stark sprang out, and I followed him. As we reached the veranda, he suddenly pulled me forward. Almost as soon as I had left the carriage, I found myself in the hall, without having a time to see what the house was like. No sooner had we crossed the threshold than the door was slammed violently behind us, and from the sound of the wheels, it was clear that the carriage was driving away. It was pitch dark inside. The colonel was groping about for matches, muttering to himself. Suddenly, a door opened at the far end of the corridor, and a beam of golden light appeared. The light grew brighter, and at last a woman emerged, holding a lamp above her head and peering at us. She was a beautiful woman. From the way her dark dress shone in the lamplight, I could tell that it was made of expensive material. She spoke a few words in a foreign language. From the emphasis, it sounded like a question. When the colonel cut her short with a monosyllabic reply, she started so violently that she almost dropped the lamp. Colonel Stark went over to her, whispered something in her ear, and then pushed her back toward the room from which she had come. He then returned to me with the lamp. "I must ask you to wait in this room for a little while," he said, opening the door of another room. It was small, quiet, and plainly furnished. In the middle stood a round table, on which lay a number of German books scattered about. "I shall not keep you waiting long," he added, and then left the room and disappeared into the darkness. Examining the books on the table, I could tell, though I do not know German, that 2 of them were scientific works and the rest volumes of poetry. Hoping to see what was going on outside, I went to the window, but the oak shutters were tightly closed. There was not a sound in the house. Except for the ticking of an old clock somewhere in the corridor, the place was completely silent. A vague sense of uneasiness began to stir within me. Who were these Germans? What were they doing in this lonely place? Where was I? All I knew was that I was about 16 kilometers from Erfurt, but whether to the east, west, north, or south, I had no idea. I might have been in Reading or in any one of a dozen other towns. Although the complete silence suggested that I was in the countryside, I could not have been in a completely deserted place. There had to be some settlement nearby. I began pacing the room and softly whistling to myself, trying to calm my nerves and lift my spirits by thinking of the £1,000 I was to receive. The door of the room suddenly opened without warning. It was the woman. The lamplight fell upon her face, revealing her beauty, but her expression showed unmistakable terror. Her fear frightened me as well. She raised her finger to her lips, motioning for silence, and whispered a few words in broken English, frequently glancing nervously back into the darkness behind her like a startled rabbit. "Go," she said in as low a voice as possible. "Go. You must not stay. It will not be good for you." "But, madam," I replied, "I have not finished my work yet. I cannot possibly leave without seeing the machine." "It is not good for you to wait," she continued. "You can go out through the door. No one will stop you." When she saw me smiling and shaking my head in refusal, she suddenly abandoned her timidity, stepped forward, clasped her hands together, and whispered, "For God's sake, go. Go before it is too late." However, being stubborn and fond of tackling difficult tasks, her words did not move me. The £1,000 were still foremost in my mind. After coming all this way, why should I return empty-handed? Why should I leave without doing my work and receiving my payment? Perhaps the woman herself had problems. Though her manner disturbed me deeply, I did not alter my resolve and shook my head again to show that I intended to stay. She was about to repeat her plea when the sound of a door opening above us and footsteps on the stairs reached our ears. She paused to listen, then raised her hands helplessly and vanished as suddenly and silently as she had appeared. Those who entered were Colonel Lysander Stark and a short, stout man with a wrinkled face covered by a beard that hung down to his double chin, whom I was introduced to as Mr. Ferguson. "He is my assistant," said the colonel. "He is also the manager of this place. By the way, I have just closed the door. I hope you were not troubled by the draft while waiting." "On the contrary," I said. The room was small and stuffy, so I opened the door myself to let in some air. He looked at me again with those suspicious eyes. "Perhaps it would be better if we began the work now," he said. "Mr. Ferguson will show you the machine." "Then I had better put on my hat." No. The machine is inside the house." "What? You dig inside the house?" No. We only do the pressing inside." "Never mind that. All we ask is that you examine the machine and tell us how to remedy the defect." With the colonel leading the way with the lamp, the stout manager following, and myself bringing up the rear, we went upstairs together. The house was old and labyrinth-like, full of corridors, narrow staircases, low doorways, and worn thresholds. There was no carpet or furniture on the ground floor. The plaster on the walls was peeling in places from dampness, leaving green stains behind. Although I had ignored the woman's desperate warnings, a feeling of unease crept over me. I did not take my eyes off the men. Ferguson appeared sullen and silent, but from his speech I could tell that he too was German. At last Colonel Lysander Stark stopped before a low door and unlocked it. Inside was a small square room, so cramped that it could barely hold 3 people. Ferguson remained outside, while the colonel entered first and I followed. "We are now inside the hydraulic press," he said. "If someone were to start it, it would be very bad for us." The ceiling you see above you is actually the face of the descending piston. It applies tons of pressure to the metal floor below. Outside are the small horizontal water columns that transmit and multiply the force, as you know very well. The machine itself is in working order, but recently it has lost much of its power and become sluggish. Perhaps if you take a look, you can show us how to repair it. I took the lamp from the colonel and carefully examined the machine. It was a massive contrivance capable of exerting tremendous force. When I went outside and lowered the control lever, the hissing sound immediately told me that there was a small leak. Because of this leak, the water was being forced back from one cylinder into another. Upon closer inspection, I saw that one of the rubber collars at the head of the maneuvering rod was not properly seated in its socket. That had to be the cause of the loss of power. I pointed out the fault to the men, who listened attentively and asked questions about how to repair it. After giving them the necessary explanations, I returned to the pressing chamber to satisfy my curiosity by examining the machine more closely. At a glance, I could see that the soapstone story was a fabrication. It was obvious that such a powerful system could not have been installed for such a trivial purpose. The walls were wooden, but the floor was made of ridged iron. As I bent down to inspect it, I noticed a thin metallic layer on its surface. I tried to scrape it with my hand to see what it was when I heard a shout in German. The colonel was muttering angrily and staring at me with his gaunt face. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. Being deceived with a false story had made me angry. "I must say, your soapstone is remarkable," I replied. "If you tell me what you really use the machine for, I may be of greater assistance to you." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them, but it was too late. His expression changed instantly, and a devilish gleam appeared in his gray eyes. "Very well," he said. "You shall learn everything about the machine very soon." Stepping back, he slammed the small door shut and locked it. I rushed at the door and turned the handle, but it was already locked. My kicks and shoulder blows were useless. "Hey," I shouted. "Hey, Colonel, let me out of here." Suddenly, I heard the control lever being pulled down and the hissing of the cylinders. My heart leapt in my throat. The machine had been started. The lamp was still where I had placed it when I bent down to examine the floor. I could see the black ceiling slowly descending, vibrating as it came down. Knowing the power of such a machine, I was well aware that within a minute I would be crushed into a shapeless pulp. I threw myself screaming against the door, clawing at the lock, begging the colonel to release me. But the merciless clatter of the piston drowned out my cries. The ceiling was now close enough for me to touch. When I raised my hand, I felt its hard, ridged surface. Thoughts of how I would meet my death flashed through my mind. If I lay face down, the weight would crush my spine. The very idea of that horrible pressure was enough to make my hair stand on end. Dying on my back might be less painful, but could I endure watching that dark mass descending upon me? The ceiling had descended so low that I could no longer stand upright when I saw something that rekindled a spark of hope in my heart. I had said that the floor and ceiling were iron, but the side walls were wooden. Between two planks, I saw a thin yellow line of light. As I pressed against the boards, the light grew brighter until the plank gave way. For a moment, I could not believe my eyes. The thing that would save me from death stood right before me. I gathered my strength, threw myself through the opening, and collapsed half unconscious on the ground outside. The plank closed behind me. Soon I heard the lamp shatter, and then the thunderous crash of metal against metal, showing how narrowly I had escaped death. When I came to my senses, someone was violently pulling at my wrist. I was lying on the stone floor of a narrow corridor. The woman, who had earlier given me friendly advice that I had foolishly ignored, was bending over me, dragging me with one hand and holding a candle in the other. "Come, come," she cried breathlessly. "When they realize you're not inside, they'll be here any moment. Hurry, we have no time." This time, I did not make the mistake of ignoring her advice. I staggered to my feet and followed her. We ran along the corridor and then descended a winding staircase, which led to yet another passageway. Just as we were about to enter it, we heard running footsteps and the shouts of two men, one on our level and one below us. My guide stopped and looked wildly from side to side. Then she opened the door of her room. Through the window, I could see the moon shining. "This is your only chance," she said. "It's high, but perhaps you can jump." As she spoke, a light appeared at the far end of the corridor. I could see Colonel Lysander Stark running toward us, a lantern in one hand and a cleaver-like object in the other. I ran to the window, opened it, and looked out. In the moonlight, the garden looked so peaceful and beautiful. The drop was no more than about 9 meters. I hung from the window ledge, but I hesitated to jump without knowing what the villain might do to the woman who had saved me. If he harmed her, I was determined to risk my life and return to help her. As these thoughts passed through my mind, the man shoved the woman aside and entered the room. She clung to him from behind, trying to stop him. "Fritz! Fritz!" she cried in English. "Remember the promise you made last time? You said it would never happen again. He will tell no one. He will tell no one." Struggling to free himself, he shouted, "You're mad, Elise. This man will ruin us all. He has seen too much. Let go of me." Pushing the woman aside, he rushed toward the window and swung the cleaver at me. I felt a sudden sharp pain, my grip loosened, and I fell. I was shaken but still conscious. I immediately got up and ran at full speed through the bushes, knowing that the danger was not yet over. Suddenly, I felt my strength give out and my head begin to spin. When I looked at my injured hand, I saw that my thumb was gone. Blood was pouring from the wound. I pulled out my handkerchief and tried to bind it, but with a roaring in my ears, I collapsed among the roses. I did not know how long I lay unconscious, but it must have been a long time, for when I came to, the moon had set and the sky was growing light. My clothes were soaked with dew, and the sleeve of my coat was crimson with blood from my hand. The pain in my thumb brought back all the details of the night's adventure in a flash. Fearing that someone might still be pursuing me, I sprang to my feet. But when I looked around, there was no sign of either house or garden. I was lying beside a fence near the main road, just below a large building. As I approached it, I realized that it was the station where I had arrived the night before. Had it not been for the dreadful wound in my hand, I might have thought the whole affair nothing more than a nightmare. Still dazed, I entered the station and asked when the morning train would depart. They told me that a train to Reading would arrive within the hour. The porter from the previous evening was still on duty. I asked him whether he had ever heard of Colonel Lysander Stark. He had not. Had he seen the carriage that had been waiting for me the night before? No, he had not. Was there a police station nearby? It was 5 kilometers away. In my injured and weakened condition, it would have been very difficult for me to walk that far. I decided to go to the police after returning to the city. When I arrived, it was just after 6 o'clock. I thought it best to have my wound attended to first. The doctor kindly treated me and then brought me here. That is my story. I shall now do whatever you advise. After listening to the man's extraordinary tale, Holmes and I sat in silence for some time. Then Sherlock Holmes reached for one of the thick volumes on a shelf, stuffed with newspaper clippings. "Here is an advertisement that may interest you," he said. "It appeared in all the newspapers about a year ago. I shall read it. Missing person. Jeremiah Haling, aged 26, left his home on the 9th at 10 o'clock and has not been heard from since. He is a hydraulic engineer and was wearing So the colonel's machine broke down last year as well." "My God," cried the man. "That explains what the woman said. Without a doubt, the colonel is clearly cold-blooded and ruthless. Like a pirate plundering ships, he wishes to leave no one alive behind him. Well then, every minute is precious. If you feel well enough, we must go to Scotland Yard before going on to Ayford." 3 hours later, we were traveling on a train from Reading toward a small village in Berkshire. There were Sherlock Holmes, the hydraulic engineer, Inspector Bradstreet from Scotland Yard, a plainly dressed man, and myself. Inspector Bradstreet unfolded a military map of the surrounding area and began drawing a circle centered on Ayford with his compass. "There," he said, "I've drawn a circle with a radius of 16 kilometers around the village. The place we're looking for must be within this circle." "You said about 16 kilometers, didn't you?" "It was not less than an hour." "You don't think they carried you all that distance while you were unconscious, do you?" "They must have. I vaguely remember being lifted from the ground and carried somewhere." "There's one thing I don't understand," I said. "Why didn't they kill you when they found you unconscious in the garden? Did that villain show mercy because of the woman's pleas?" "I doubt it. I have never seen such a merciless face." "We shall soon see what really happened," said Bradstreet. "Now that the circle is drawn, let us decide where to search." "I think I can put my finger on the right spot," Holmes said quietly. "Nonsense," cried the inspector. "You've made up your mind already. Let's see who agrees with you. I say we should look south. It's more desolate there." "I say east," said the engineer. "I'd say west," said the plainly dressed man. Because there are many small villages there. My vote is for the south as well, I said. Because it isn't hilly in that direction. Our friend said the carriage never went uphill. Well, laughed the inspector. Everyone has a different opinion. And what's your vote, Holmes? You are all mistaken. We can't all be wrong. It's quite possible. This is the spot, he said, placing his finger on the center of the circle. We shall find them right here. But what about that journey of nearly 20 kilometers? Hatherley asked nervously. 10 kilometers out and 10 kilometers back. It's that simple. You said the horse was fresh and in excellent condition when you got into the carriage. Could a horse that had traveled nearly 20 kilometers over rough roads still be fresh? They might well have resorted to such a trick, said Bradstreet thoughtfully. We already have no doubt about what that gang was doing. None at all, said Holmes. They were large-scale counterfeiters. They were using the machine to prepare a false alloy to be used instead of silver. We've been on the trail of a clever gang for some time, said the inspector. They've struck thousands of 10-shilling coins. We followed them as far as Reading, but they were experienced and slipped away. Now, by chance, we found their trail again. They won't escape us this time. But the inspector was mistaken, for the criminals had no intention of being caught. As we approached Ayford Station, we saw a huge column of smoke rising from a small cluster of trees, like a giant ostrich feather planted in the middle of the countryside. As the train slowed, Bradstreet asked, "Is a house on fire?" "Yes, sir," replied the station master. "When did the fire start?" "I'm told it started during the night, sir, but it's grown quite large now, and the flames have spread everywhere." "Whose house is it?" "Dr. Betcher's." "Tell me," the engineer interjected, "was this Dr. Betcher a tall, thin man with a sharp nose?" The station master laughed heartily. "No, sir. He's English, and there's no one in the village who fills out his clothes better. But he does have a patient staying with him. That one, as far as I can tell, isn't English, and he could certainly do with a good meal." Before the station master had finished speaking, we were hurrying toward the fire. Following the road and cresting a low hill, we saw the scene clearly. A white-painted house stood before us, flames pouring from every window and crack in its walls. In the garden, 3 fire engines were making a futile effort to control the blaze. "There it is," cried Hatherley excitedly. There's the gravel road, and there are the roses where I lay. And that second window, that's where I jumped from." "Well, at least you've had your revenge," said Holmes. "There's no doubt that the fire was started by the gas lamp in the press chamber. It must have ignited the wooden walls. They were probably too agitated to notice and intervene in time while pursuing you. I fear they've already escaped, but look at the crowd. Can you see any of your friend from last night?" Holmes was right. From that day to this, we have heard nothing more of the beautiful woman, the murderous German, or the surly Englishman. Early that morning, a villager had seen a carriage galloping at full speed toward Reading, carrying several people and some very large crates. That was the only clue, and even Holmes's keen intellect was powerless to capture the fugitives. The firefighters were astonished by the strange apparatus they found inside and by a freshly severed human thumb discovered near one of the windows. By sunset, their efforts finally bore fruit and the fire was brought under control. But the roof had collapsed, and the building was so badly damaged that only a few pipes and a couple of crushed cylinders remained of the machine that had cost our new acquaintance so dearly. In another building in the garden, large quantities of nickel and tin were found, but no coins, thus revealing the contents of those large crates the criminals had taken with them. Had the ground not been soft, it would have remained a mystery forever how the hydraulic engineer was carried from where he collapsed to the spot where he regained consciousness. But the tracks told the whole story. It was clear that he had been carried by 2 people, one with very small feet and the other with enormous ones. The taciturn Englishman, perhaps less ruthless or less courageous than his partner, must have helped the woman rescue the unconscious man. As we took our seats to return to London, the engineer said, "What a fine outcome. I've lost both my thumb and £1,000. What have I gained?" "Experience," said Holmes with a smile. "And indirectly, you may make a great profit. If you put this into writing, you will never forget it for as long as you live."